Hi everyone, it's Michelle from MEW Designs, and I'm going to explain how I sew in the gather panel on the Marie Tote. And I have some pieces cut out here from the smaller size, so the top and the bottom. When you're cutting out, make sure you do try and cut them right side up. Now, in the pattern, my testers asked that I put the conventional, traditional method of gathering up towards the top. It's not the method that I recommend, but it's probably easier if you're not feeling confident. So, to join these pieces, to start off with, right sides together, I like to start at the side seams. Put a clip a little bit down the side seam, and then one there. Again on the other side, match those side seams up, clip or pin, and then clip there. Now, the first step for sewing will be to sew just in slightly from each side. That helps anchor everything in. And then it's a matter of gathering. So if you're not using traditional conventional gathers, you can have a lot more freedom and a lot more fun playing around with fitting this onto this line. And there's no right way to do it. I like to just start clipping, just enough that you don't want it to be so tight that you're pulling. Leave a little bit of ease. This curved part sometimes through here can be a bit tricky. Just make sure you leave yourself plenty of fabric to play with. I'll put a clip up there. Move that along. And I'm actually going to put a lot of gather in here, I've decided. So pull it over. And I'll actually do the gathers at the sewing machine. Just at this stage, balancing it all nicely. I'm essentially just preparing it. And I'll go less gathers here, but up on this ridgy part I'm going to put a lot of gathers in there, so there's a lot of extra fabric through there. So I clip it together like that and do a lot of the gathering work actually at the sewing machine. And when you're sewing in just a little bit on each side, think of that as more of an anchor. It's just giving you a spot to hold everything, and it's also making sure you don't put gathers in the seam, because that would make the seam really thick and just makes it more difficult to sew. If you do end up with gathers there, it's fine. That step's just in there to make things a little easy. What I do on both of these, the 1 centimetre 3/8 seam allowance and just a few stitches in. So that is one side, and then this side it is easier to flip it over and pop it in. Always remember to backstitch. When sewing around these curves, if you do need to adjust, make sure that your needle's down, and you can actually move the pieces, lift your foot up, you can move the pieces separately, and that can make it a lot easier to keep to that seam allowance. You just do a few stitches and then adjust. Those are the two sides anchored in. So now it's the fun sewing along the curve. I've popped the clips back on. And what I find really handy for putting the gathers in is a screwdriver. It doesn't have to be a screwdriver. You could use the point of a hump jumper, a chopstick, a fork. It's just having something that you can maneuver the fabric underneath the foot and keep your fingers away from it, because the last thing you want is needle versus finger. So I've got a basic lineup of where I'd like the gathers to be. You want the gather panel on top because you want to keep an eye on what's going there, and if you're using a thicker fabric, it also lets you make sure that you're not sort of doubling up the gathers and that it's getting super thick. So going back to where we've already stitched, and just in behind, I'm going to stitch over the top of that. And again, keep an eye on that bottom panel. I can see already that the gather panel's just trying to push out a bit. So I'm going to backstitch to start. And then make sure that the bottom panel is on the 1 centimetre and so is the top. Do a couple of stitches. So this is where lifting the foot and twisting things around. And then to do my gathers, I use the screwdriver and I tuck a bit under. So if you want a nice big tuck, take a large amount of fabric, lift, needle down, lift the foot up, push it under. If you want lots of little ones, just do tiny little tucks. So put one tuck in, and then a few stitches, the next tuck, a few stitches, the next tuck, and then this bit I'm going to not do any gathers on. It's really fun having bits with gathers and then bits without gathers, because it does make it have a completely different shape. And you can even just, using your fingers, lay the fabric down and just have fun with it. This is not something that's ever going to be perfect. There's no right way to do it. It's just about having a lot of fun with fabric manipulation. I'm doing a nice big tuck up here. That'll look cool. And so again, with the needle down, lifting the foot up, keeping an eye on that bottom panel, just making sure that you're getting a good seam allowance there. So I've sewn all the way across to the other side, and you can see I've got some areas with no gathers, some areas with more gathers, but it gives it a really lovely finish. Now, I will put a second row of stitching along, and then I'm going to trim back, clip the curve, because that will also help everything sit just a little bit flatter. When you're trimming, be really careful that you're watching where everything is, because it is quite easy to accidentally snip Oh. We're just looking for a nice sort of trim it in half, lay it flat again, and if any areas are really not sitting flat, then you can trim in a little closer. Just, you don't want to cut your stitching. If you do cut your stitching, just whack it back under the sewing machine, stitch a little higher, and that should repair it. It's not the end of the world doing that, it's just easier not to have to do repairs. That is everything trimmed. I will quickly do my second row of stitching, and then with the magic of video editing, I'll come back in for the top stitching. So the next step is top stitching. Now, as you can see on here, that because of the way that I've put it in, that's actually going to sit with quite a lot of volume. And that's actually okay. It doesn't have to sit traditionally flat. That's the whole fun of the gather panel. I've changed to a narrow foot because I found when I'm trying to concentrate on talking as well as sewing, I'm not always accurate in my top stitching. So hopefully this foot is going to help me do a lovely accurate row of top stitching. And I like to do a segment at a time when I'm top stitching. So do a little bit and then adjust, have a look at where things are, smooth them out, do a little bit more. It's not a race, it's not a racetrack. You don't have to get from one end to the other. Just do it in small bits, adjust as you go, remembering needle down, move things around, keep on sewing. So, let's see how this goes. And because this is a narrow foot, it didn't want to get started at the end there because it doesn't sit over the feed dogs as well. So what I find is you do need to pull on the fabric a little bit, or another trick that I learnt from TAFE Teacher is you can use a pin and get the pin in behind and help drag the fabric through. Again, using the pin is keeping your fingers away. So I'm going to start stitching, just stop, smooth that seam down, sew a little bit more, stop, check it, smooth it. But particularly around the curves, you just want to make sure that everything's sitting in the right direction. I'm just going to lift, needle down, lift my foot up, move everything. And that is the top stitching done. And that is going to stick out. fantastic volume there and just really, really make it pop. And so when that bottom seam is stretched out to meet the back, it'll just puff out beautifully. So that is the gather panel on the Marie Tote. I can't wait to see all the examples and everybody just having fun playing with the volume of the fabric.